Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Learn with Jason. Today on the show, we've got Jamie Barton. Jamie, how you doing?
I'm doing very good. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm super excited to have you on the show. I think this is going to be a lot of fun. So before we jump into what we're doing today, let's talk a little bit about you. So for folks who aren't familiar with you and your work, do you want to give us a bit of a background?
Yeah, of course. So I've been working in DevRel for the last 6, 7 years, I think, across lots of different domains. That is headless commerce, e-commerce. Mostly working with GraphQL over the last 4 years. But before I dived into DevRel, I was working um, as a Ruby on Rails dev, and I was before that was a bit of PHP. So I've been around a while, and like way before all of that, I was building stuff with Flash and ActionScript. So I've been around a while, but these days you'll find me working with all of the cool tools.
Very cool. Yeah, so that's funny. Except for the Rails, I think you and I had the same career trajectory because I was doing a lot of Flash
Yeah,
stuff back in the day. Well, cool.
so
So
good.
so we wanted to talk today because you've got a lot of experience and insight into something that I think is becoming a more and more common pain point for devs, which is how do you take the unbundled services that make up today's professional landscape, and by that I mean everything now is a service. You buy the best in class API for content, for e-commerce, for data, for whatever it is, right? And then you have these excellent tools, but when you go to build a web app with it, you have like 15 APIs you got to deal with, and so you're doing a lot of juggling. You've got data that's, it's technically connected, but it's running through multiple APIs, and so you end up building a lot of, at least in my experience, what I ended up building a lot of were like a helper function that called two endpoints and then did a bunch of looping and data merging so that I could make my internal function return the object that I needed.
Yeah.
That space is, I think, like this is the blessing and the curse of unbundling everything is you get these great tools that do one thing really, really well. And also you get the downside, which is this complexity of having like a million API endpoints to hit. So I feel like you've been working on this space and you're specifically in this space right now. So how are developers solving this problem for themselves?
Well, I think you are totally right. Like we have an abundance of different SDKs, APIs that we all plug in, like you say, for these kind of best of breed tools. I don't know if that's the term we're still using these days, but we use these kind of best of breed tools to use everything. And for a while, like you say, we created these helper files, and then we created these API routes and serverless functions to do that when we wanted to run server side stuff. Then we ended up with like APIs on top of APIs, and then we had to kind of create all of those typed API routes. So we've seen lots of different ways to solve this problem, I think. And I think in amongst all of that, you'll know this more than anyone, I guess, but with Gatsby, when Gatsby first came out, it was quite cool because you could just talk to one API to fetch data. Yes, problem existed for mutating. You had to create all of these serverless endpoints. But for querying data, that was quite a nice experience for a while actually. And then now, as more things are moving back to the server, um, we're now again installing SDKs, and we might be able to run code on the server with server components and all of that now. But we've still got that problem of installing dozens and dozens of node modules to use all the tools we want to use. And the beauty of all of these tools now is that they all have APIs. They have data APIs, and the one thing that we are focused on is actually trying to bring that stuff to the edge so it's faster and users aren't having to pay for it. So we can talk about that more about that in detail later, I guess. But yeah, I still think today people are creating these endpoints, but what a lot of people are doing at a larger scale is creating these subgraphs and then a super graph on top of it, or a federated service, or whatever you want to call it,
Okay, so you just
to
introduced
talk to the
three.
different services.
You just introduced a handful of new vocabulary words there. So I want to take a second
Yeah,
and think about what that means. So when we're
yeah,
talking about like GraphQL in general, the idea of GraphQL is that you have sort of one endpoint, and then within that endpoint, you've got like a grouping. So you would hit the GraphQL endpoint and you would say, I want to get accounts or user or whatever. And then inside of that,
yeah,
you kind of nest the fields that you want from there. And so when you say a subgraph or a supergraph, what does that
yeah.
mean in the context of GraphQL?
Yeah, so it's more, I think, the best way to understand this for anyone is that it's more of an architecture thing. So these different microservices, all these kind of dedicated services that do one thing, you can think of those as subgraphs. So there could be a user service, there could be a friend service, or whatever it be. And then you have all of these different services that you call out to, and those kind of create the subgraphs. And then the supergraph, or whatever you want to call it, is a gateway to all of these services.
I
So you
gotcha.
might have a GraphQL API that has all of these things, but when you call the different things, they go to different services beneath that. Um, yeah, so I think that's the best way to describe it is you can still have all of those functions we had, but you can go through another layer now to access that. And it's quite cool because you can put stuff at that layer. So, things like caching and whatever to make that so you don't go to the services beneath it. But yeah, let's not get on a tangent.
No, I think that, and I mean, this is such an interesting space because it's, and also, sorry, like they're dumping the recycling out outside. So it's just like glass bottles being thrown around. So
Thrown out all of those different microservices and introduce them one.
but so like this is a really familiar problem to me. So one of the ways that I first got into open source was I was at IBM, and we had several dozen teams that all had to speak to each other, and the way that we decided to do it was through microservices. So each team had their own APIs, and they were exposing those APIs sometimes with an open API definition and sometimes without, and sometimes there was documentation and sometimes there wasn't. And there was no real like communication channel. So people didn't know how these APIs worked, whether they were maintained, which endpoints were good or bad. And conversely, the teams didn't know which endpoints they exposed were still being used or which pieces of data in those endpoints were actually necessary. So they were just maintaining these giant messes of APIs. And so we looked at it as this is before concepts like a subgraph or a federation, but GraphQL was pretty brand spanking new at this point. And I looked at it as like, oh, well, if we got each of these services to write a GraphQL schema that defined their APIs, then the benefits to me and my team were that we'd have one place that we could go and look, and it's self-documenting, because if we write a GraphQL API, like the schema is the source of truth. You get documentation out of that. The other thing that we really liked was that the teams that were exposing these APIs only had to notify the central layer. They didn't have to go tell the other 31 teams that they worked with what had changed. They only had to tell the central layer, and the other teams could look at that as the source of truth. And so there were all these benefits and these upsides. And now, granted, like you mentioned, the complexity doesn't go away. Complexity, you don't like remove complexity, you manage it. And so you try to find the right layer to move it to that makes it feel as manageable as possible. And like there were a lot of, I mean, I did this back in 2016, I think. So a lot has changed since then. Like there are a lot of advancements in the space, and a lot has improved. And that's actually why I'm really excited to look at this, because I haven't been deep in this space 4 or 5 years, 6 years. Oh my God.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about like how you're solving this problem specifically at Grafbase.
Yeah.
So to set the stage, like I'll come in if I'm a standard company and I'm going to have internal APIs. So I've got my core service, maybe that's a Node microservice or a Ruby or whatever. That's got some APIs internally that's maintained by one team. I've got my front end team that needs to interact with that data, but they're also running memberships through Stripe. They're also running analytics through whatever a backend analytics platform. We're also pulling, I don't know, like maybe we're a dev tool service, so we're reading from GitHub, and we need all these different pieces of data, and all those have to play together nicely in our app. So if we're coming to Grafbase, how do we start to solve this problem?
Yeah, so I think that's one problem that we solve, and I just want to unpack that a little bit as well, because the thing that is kind of our secret sauce actually is something that people don't realize that is possible with what you just said. So, what I'm saying is, if you've got all of these different data sources, some of them can belong in one region, or and these regions can be scattered all over the world where your data is. And a lot of services allow you to pay to replicate that to multiple regions, but then you have this kind of growing number of multi-regions you have to pay for with every single provider.
Right.
And then that's not efficient, because you make one request that goes to 6 different regions. You don't know which replica you're paying for. So it's going to make hops all over around the world to get back to you. And that's fundamentally our secret sauce, our bread and butter. That's what we are solving when we say we unify data sources. So we can take whatever data source you connect, and we can bring it to the edge. And we are built on the Cloudflare network, so we can do that with over 300, data centers or points of presence across the world. So that's fundamentally, I think, the message that I would like the company to start projecting, is that forget about just unifying data sources and that it's GraphQL, but your data can be somewhere in one location that you pay for, but you can bring it to the edge with another service in front of it, and then you get all of these other bells and whistles on top of that with the service. So with Graph-Base, what you can do is I guess in a moment we'll go to the website and we'll sign up for an account, and we'll deploy something very quickly from one of our templates. But then we're going to dive into actually the code. I think I'd love to show you that,
Yeah.
how we can actually bring in another GraphQL API, or bring in something like a REST API using the Open API spec, and then we can transform that automatically to GraphQL. And then there's other things like, if you've ever deployed, I'm sure you have, but created a GraphQL server where you install Apollo or GraphQL Yoga, and then you create a resolver and a type definition. We support all of that kind of thing as well. So we're ultimately trying to be this one-stop shop for deploying GraphQL APIs at the edge. But the beauty of that is you can connect all of your data sources. So yeah, I think that answers your question, but I wanted to kind of talk about that edge thing, because I think that is really, really important.
Yeah, I think especially as it feels like it wasn't that long ago when services would kind of explicitly be like US only or Europe only or whatever. And so they weren't really thinking about what does it mean if I'm in, the data is in San Francisco and the customer is in Australia. Like the speed of light means that request is going to take an extra 200 milliseconds or something. Like it's not fast to send a request all the way around the world. And when you're doing a lot of requests, if all of your data is in US East 2, then folks in Asia, Australia, they're going to have a hard time with your app. Like it's just going to feel slow to them all the time, just through the constraints of physics. So finding a way to globally distribute in a way that doesn't have an exploding cost or doesn't have exploding complexity is very tempting for most businesses today, where when we launch, we're launching globally. We're not really thinking about geography as a restriction for who would use or benefit from our service.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of people, including myself, make the assumption, if I create an API route at the edge, then I solve all my problems because it's at the edge around the world. But if your data is in US East and you're in Singapore or wherever, and you make a request, it goes to the closest edge, but then it still has to make that hop to over to the US and then back to the edge, back to you. It could have actually been quicker to go directly from you to the US instead of that edge location.
Right.
So what we are saying is bring all of your data to the closest edge, essentially. So you only go there and back.
Well, and that's funny too, because when you say that, it makes me think about like, and that's an API endpoint with a single data source, right? So when you hit the edge and then you've got that round trip to US East 2 or whatever, that's before you consider that once you hit US East 2, the data there is going to make a request to something else that maybe, if you're lucky, is in US East 2 and is really fast, but it also might be in, Singapore or something. And now you've got these like round trips around the world. It's all initially connected to that local host that's, 500 meters away from your house or whatever Cloudflare's density is these days. But it's just like, the complexity of trying to get this right when you have any kind of complexity in your application, it just gets out of hand so fast because you're not just thinking about one hop now. You're thinking about every hop in the chain. And so what you're promising here with Grafbase is that you've taken that and you've decided we're going to manage that for you so that when you interact with Grafbase, all the data has moved to the edge. So if you hit our edge endpoint, everything you need to do is going to happen right here. So if you're hitting that Cloudflare edge network, that's the only round trip that needs to be made.
Yeah, small caveat there is the way that we actually do this is through edge caching. So we will, and we also, with that mechanism, if you request something, it's not in the cache, it's not at the edge, and it's not distributed, then we'll go to the origin. But, if you are, once it's in there, and we do things like stale while revalidate. So you'll get the data fast, but it might be out of date by a millisecond. So the next request will get it. And thanks to GraphQL Stream and Defer that's coming, we're working on this at the moment. So if you did get that stale response, you could just stream the update to the page and no one would even really know, would they? So that's what we're working on. But that was just a small caveat with that.
Cool.
Because we're working with data APIs. So that's how we're able to kind of keep it fast.
Nice. All right. Well, I want to see this in action. So why don't I take us over into the pair programming view here? And all right. So first and foremost, we're talking to Jamie today. So make sure you go and get on the social network. This episode, like every episode, is being live captioned. We've got Vanessa here from White Coat Captioning doing all these little closed captions. That's that little CC button. That works because a real human is really pushing buttons, which is wonderful. That's made possible through the support of our sponsors. We've got Netlify and Vetsu Code, both kicking in to make this show more accessible to more people, which I very much appreciate. So make sure you go and check them out. And I think that's all I know. Let me go to the Grafbase site, because I know we're going to be looking at that. And that's all I know. So if I want to try this out, what should I do first?
I think the first thing is to sign in.
Okay.
So there should be a get started, and then you can sign in with GitHub.
I'm in.
Cool. So what we'll do now, I guess, this is using what you see here is a few templates that we have for our own database offering. But we're moving slightly away from this. This is here if you want it. It's basically it's almost a KV store, you could think of it, but with a few extra things like uniqueness and length validations and even relations. But yeah, we'll get started with this just so we can deploy something, and then we can dive into the more advanced stuff. So maybe it's just pick any one of those.
Okay.
Chat room, blog, whichever.
Yeah, let's do a blog. So I'm going to connect my GitHub account.
And this is the way that we've got started here actually is with the web interface. So you can also do all of this through the CLI as well, which is cool.
Okay. So I'm going to add an account. I'll add it to Learn with Jason if I can find it. There it is. I'm in too many GitHub repos. right. And
Cool.
let's see. So I'm in Oregon, so that seems to make sense. I'm assuming I don't need any environment variables.
No, at the moment, no.
Okay.
And just click deploy. And this should then create an account on GitHub, a repo on GitHub with this project. And then we see immediately here that we've got an endpoint, and that's our GraphQL API endpoint that you would use when you go on to build a front end. You can use this URL. So
Nice.
this is just the dashboard right now. As you start to do more things with your API, more things will go on. Will happen here. But I just let's talk about maybe some of the concepts that's going on here. Um, we got project. If you move into deployments now, here you can get a list like you would if you were with Netlify, and you deploy something. All of your list of deployments would happen here,
Okay.
and all of your branches. And then with Pathfinder, that will launch with your project once it's. I'm guessing maybe it needs to be refreshed or something. That should be deploying anyways. Once it's done, that'll be there. And then schema, you'll be able to see the schema once it's deployed, and then analytics as well. It's obviously still deploying
Got it.
as we speak. But the great thing about the analytics as well, it's built in. So when you are making requests, you kind of get full view of that. So there, we've got an in progress deployment. So yeah, this normally only takes a few seconds. So yeah, it'll be assigning domains and certificates and stuff. So once that's done, you get a URL and you're free to use it.
Nice.
Now the cool thing with this deployment stuff is if you create if you go over to GitHub now, to that URL, you can just click on that here. And then what you'll see is you get a project here, you have a folder called Grafbase, and inside of there you have a file called grafbase config.ts. And then this is
okay.
outlining that template, and it's using a TypeScript config. Now, for anyone that's familiar with GraphQL, you can actually use GraphQL SDL to do all of this. But these days we're all using TypeScript, so we have an SDK. But yeah, that anything we change in there, if you were to create a branch now, we would take the configuration in the new branch and we would deploy you an immutable URL that contains the changes. And then when you're happy and you merge the pull request, those changes go to prod, which is cool. So it's that same experience, I think, that all of the front end things do with the preview deployments.
Yeah.
We wanted to bake that experience in as well.
That's great. Like it feels very common to, I guess, how I'm used to working for the web, which is always nice. All right, so we've got a successful deployment.
Yeah.
And
so
look at this.
Yeah, so this is what we call Pathfinder. It's a similar experience probably to GraphQL and GraphQL Playground. This is something that is not just specific to Graph-based. Next week, we are launching this UI as a desktop app as well. So you'll be able to use any GraphQL API and make requests with as well. And inside of there, you can make GraphQL queries and whatever. So I think what we could do, that's a single query. You could go to the post collection query, and you could create that query.
Okay, so let's go with let's see, edges node. We'll get the title.
Yeah, so you'll need to, with this, before we run it, is actually pass some arguments. So if you go into the arguments and click first, we require no more than 100. So that should be fine. We run that, there's going to be nothing in there, but that returns the data. That's a very GraphQL experience, right? Query response. Now these queries, you'll see on the right pane at the very bottom that you get the history. If you open the history, you should see there that you get a response. And then if you run that again, you'll see that response time decreases because it's then cached. Now, what we were talking about before, imagine that with all of your different data sources. We do that. So this is using our own database right now. But yeah, where should we look now? So this is a query. Obviously, GraphQL, there's mutations to mutate stuff. we build all of those as well for all of the different things to create, update, delete, and many as well. So
Okay.
those are all generated automatically. But yeah, this is very, very standard stuff, very basic stuff, I guess. If anyone's used any of these providers that do all of this, the real fun is with the connect and stuff. But here you could type in anything inside of there, I think, for the input. Just hit return and yeah.
Yeah, so you can do something
Because it's
like...
a post.
And then it wants more things.
It'll probably want a lot more like an author and stuff. So we could type all of that out.
Oh, wait, what does it want? It wants post create. Oh, we need a selection of subfield. So then I would get back the ID. And then it's happy. So if I run this, field of slug is required.
It's going to ask for all of the required fields. So slug, it still requires something, I think.
User, we're going to get into a spot where I probably don't know where to go. Because the user is going to have, this is going to take longer than we probably want to spend. Okay.
Yeah.
But like, you can see the fact that it's just coaching me through this and telling me like, hey, you also got to send in a user. And then I would do, like, I haven't read a single document. There's 0 docs happening right now. Yeah. I know that GraphQL works like this, so I can basically fumble my way to working queries, which is, I don't think something that is, I don't know how you would do the same thing with a REST API. And that, I feel like this is maybe the biggest argument that I've made in favor of GraphQL is if you've got a team and the team isn't great at docs or communication and it's gotta be cross-functional, GraphQL is a way to basically say the code enforces communication. Because there's no way to make a GraphQL API that somebody else can't use through trial and error.
Yeah. That's when we get into the local version, you'll also see that you can see the full schema, and then there's a little bit more to that as well. So yeah, what you see here, you can see everything in there. And that's one of the things that I think a lot of people enjoyed with GraphQL was this self-documenting feature. It was just built in. So you could create documentation automatically using all of this fun stuff. So like you said, you don't need to go to the docs, and when you make a mistake, it often tells you. That has its concerns as well. So we are working on ways to disable that, because say someone wants to do something bad and you want to disable this kind of thing, obviously we want to give people the tools to do that. So we're working on that as well, to make that possible. But I think we could now take, if you want to clone that repo that it created on GitHub to your local machine.
Let's see, it's over here.
Run all of this locally.
And set it to be private. I'm going to make this public so people can see it. If I want to do that, I do it where? Okay, so now we've got a repo that everybody can go look at if they want to, and I'm going to clone it in VS Code. It's not open yet, so let me open that. And then I'll just move back into here, and we'll do a GitHub repo clone. And it was Learn with Jason blog. Okay. And we'll open that up, and here we go. Okay, so now we've got our setup.
Yeah, we've got everything there. So if you open up the terminal now, we might need to run npm install.
Looks like yes.
Yeah, so now you can run npx graph-based dev. And if you're happy with that, this should now, everything we've seen online It'll all be running locally. You didn't need to do anything.
Oh,
Go
cool.
on a repo and go.
Where did this go? It's here. Where on earth? Oh, it opened in the wrong window. Okay. I need to make... Yikes. I have this very helpful thing that is not being
It's
helpful
cool,
at
though.
all.
When it works, I guess.
It's so great when it works, and then when it rebels so hard.
Yeah. I was like, wow, those are just like assigning themselves positions. That's cool.
They're supposed to do what I say, but they do what they want. All right, so
Yeah.
I'm in localhost, and I've got that same thing with the Pathfinder and all that stuff. And
Yeah.
then if I
Yeah.
want to hit the endpoint, which there's not really any benefit in me doing right now, it's right here.
You could just So that endpoint, what you see here with the Pathfinder, that will call out to that GraphQL API. So that's what your application would query. But for localhost, what you see at the root here is this UI experience.
Nice.
So in the future, we want to bring more of that production dashboard feeling into the local experience. So everything you do in prod or in your dashboard, you can see locally as well.
Nice.
And with what you've got here, if you go to, we don't want to waste our time doing that query again, but if you were to do that query again, that is now fetching from a local database that we've created for you using SQLite. So we mimic the production environment locally. So when you create things and update things, it happens all on your machine as well.
Oh,
So
that's cool.
you're not having to do any network requests to a database, which is cool.
And that shows in the the speed is like half of, because it's all local.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah. So that is basically getting started. You can also run npx graph-base init, and it will ask you, what kind of project you want to create. You can pass it one of those templates. I wanted to go through the web experience because that's ultimately where these end up. So I wanted to show that first. But now I think what we could do is actually look to add a connector for a data source.
Let's do it.
Maybe, yeah. So we could begin with a GraphQL API. We could stitch that in.
Sure.
So I think we could go to the docs if you wanted to, if that's easier, or we could just write it in code, whichever you prefer.
We can just write it in code. Do you have a GraphQL API in mind, or do I need to stand one up?
Let's think of one. We could use the very top of mind is the Trevor Blades Countries API. It's very old, but it's a classic, right? We could use that.
What is it?
I think it's countries.trevorblades.com. I think that's a public API.
Countries.
Yeah, this is it.
Okay.
Yeah, so we just grab that URL, yeah.
Got it. And then I'm coming over here.
Yeah, so what I would suggest now actually is where we've got comment, post, and user, let's just get rid of that stuff. We don't need this.
Okay.
Keep the export, yeah. Get rid of all of that. And then now, if you want to, instead of the import connector. And then we can create a new const that is called countries. And that can be equal to connector. And then it's TypeScript, so we should just be able to do dot period, and it will show GraphQL.
Oh, look at that.
And then parentheses, we can give a name for the API. This is custom, so this is what will be used for the namespace. So if you're using multiple country APIs, you might want to name them differently.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And
so
then
we pasted the URL in there as well, but we could go as far as adding environment variables, and you can deploy those if you wanted to. But yeah, I think that's all we should need for this. I think.
Okay.
We can just move outside of that const definition, and then we'd be able to do g.data sources, or data source, sorry. And then I think in parentheses, we can just pass countries. Yeah. And then as a second option inside of those parentheses, you could add an object with some options. We don't need to do that.
Okay.
But you could disable the namespace if you wanted to. in there. So that's really cool when you want to add the caching on top of any API and not have to change your queries. So
How-
I'll show you what that
Can
looks
you,
like later, I guess.
yeah, actually, I was going to say, like, I don't think I understand what you mean, so I'm excited to learn more about that.
Yeah. So we'll do that. So save that. That should be running still, and then we get the countries API in there. So it's stitched this API into countries as a namespace. So
And
we'll just run
let's
one of
just
those.
get name and run it.
Cool.
And there's our
Cool.
list of
So
countries. So
magic.
that's pretty
Awesome.
handy that just worked.
Yeah. Yeah, it just works. Obviously, that API doesn't have any auth around it. If it did, you can configure specifying environment variables for the auth, or you could configure header forwarding. So if your client app had a token generated, you can pass that, and it'll pass it through to the origin as well, which is quite cool. But you'll notice here that the countries is the name of the namespace that you specified. So that's wrapped everything that it's kind of stitched in inside of there. But if you go back to the code and you add to the data source line, you add in an object after countries, you can specify namespace as false, and then that will remove that prefix. There you go. So
Oh, and so,
countries,
yeah, so now it's
that's
broken.
in the API.
And I need to change this to like that, and then we get the same thing. Okay. Yeah. All right. So
Yeah.
so basically, if we are 100% certain that there will be no collisions in the queries or mutations inside of two APIs, we can drop the namespace and then they just kind of merge together.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So if you open up that history pane again, I'm not sure if the caching stuff is just mimicked locally, but if you run that a few times, you should see the response time. In production, it's caching. Here, it's probably just running locally, I think. So it's going straight to the origin. But in production, we'll push this to production later on. You'll get that reduced time. So when you say that when there's no collisions, if you just wanted to use Grafbase to speed up GraphQL API that you already have and bring it to the edge, you can disable a namespace, and your developer or whoever's implementing the API doesn't have to change the query. It just works. All you do is change the endpoint, and we act as a proxy.
Oh. So
But you
so
get
in
for
that
free caching.
sense, I hadn't really thought about it like that, but so I can use Graph-Base without using Graph-Base. I can just build my API in whatever I want, proxy it through Graph-Base, and I get edge caching for free.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
that's a pretty dang cool on ramp.
Yeah. I think being able to disable those namespaces and just use it without using it, it's pretty cool. It just works. I think what we could do actually is I'll show you a bit of the caching config for anyone that's interested.
Yeah.
So back inside of the code editor, at the config default export, we can then add cache, yeah, and then that's an object, and we can pass an array of rules. And then we can pass, so you can configure multiple rules for different types. So here we'll pass types, and then that's an array of strings. So we'll just say we'll cache everything. So we'll just call it query with a capital Q, yeah. And that's the GraphQL root type query. So here we are going to cache everything, and then add a max age as well, whatever you want that to be. 30, 60, whatever. Yeah. So that's going to cache everything for that period of time. And then once that time's up, it's gone out the cache, and then it'll go back to the origin and update the cache again.
I should probably make
There's
this
also an
shorter while
option-
we're testing, right? Like go 30 seconds or so.
Yeah, I think also what's actually worth mentioning here is that ridiculous high max age is probably okay for the API that we're using, because those countries aren't ever going to change.
That's true.
So,
Or at least not
so-
within the, what is this? A few days, a week. What is 36?
So it's not going to change, right? So imagine that was a product API. Products rarely change the data. The prices and the stock and the variant may,
Mm-hmm.
but with these rules, you can be really specific and say, cache a type, a GraphQL type, for a certain period of time, and you can then specify what field is the cache key. So a product
Interesting.
ID is the key. So if anything changes at all in the cache with any query you've made, if those two things are part of the key, we'll bust that for you. So it's quite cool when you think about it like that, I
That's
guess.
yeah, that's really cool because like thinking about how I would use this, like the old joke, the two hard things in computer programming, cache is one of them. When you're dealing with caching, one of the things that I see go wrong the most is that if you're caching at the API route level, you have two options. You let data be out of date through the cache duration, or you invalidate everything on every data change. And both of those solutions are fine in context, but not great. And so then people start to get clever, and this is where it really starts to fall apart, because then they'll start to like do sub caching of whatever thing it is based on query parameters or whatever, and then somebody finds a way to break their cache, and now they've got like a poison cache updating another poison cache, and then like they can't get out of this loop, and production goes down, right? And so I find that when it comes to caching, my instinct is like go as coarse as possible and ignore it, because it's good enough and it's not worth the mental overhead. But this is clever, because if what you're saying here is I can say like, all right, I want to cache my product. My product is going to have all the details, the inventory, all that kind of stuff. And if I can say like my cache key is the inventory level and the price, and like anything else, I kind of don't care. Like if we fix a typo in the description, it's all right. That can age out. Like we don't need to update everything right away. But if I change the price, that needs to happen right now. And if those are the only two fields I care about, that's a type of precise caching that I understand, and that I think anybody can really understand. That I assume y'all have done the work to make sure that this isn't one of those things where I, through my own unwitting behavior, can put myself into like a caching death spiral.
Yeah, there is multiple APIs to resolve anything that could be out of date. So, like you say, there are those perfect cases where you're not bothered when the description is updated, because it can be cached for a day. But we have APIs where you can actually remove the cache. You can purge the cache. But let's say you have a GraphQL API, let's take this countries one, for example. It's only got queries, right? But imagine you had mutations to create a country or a continent or whatever, and you created a new country that belonged to something else. We can detect through that mutation the ID and the type, and we can then invalidate anything in the cache with that. And you can configure that as much or as little as you like. So you can say, with what we call mutation invalidation, you can pass it different properties to say cache in different scenarios. So you might not want that default behavior. You might want to cache it on a different field instead of ID. You can do that as well. So we've got some sensible defaults. We'll do what is probably expected on 99% of apps. But if you want to turn any levers and knobs or whatever, all the tools are there to do that, which is cool.
So a silly little programming aside, but I didn't go to school for computer science, right? And so every once in a while we talk about concepts that require like very computer sciencey approaches, like caching. How do you do cache invalidation? It's very algorithmic. It's very whatever. So as you were talking about this, the only computer science term I know about caching pinged in my brain, and I was like, you got to work out a way to say Merkle tree. And I don't actually, I don't need to say that, but I figured it was worth mentioning for anybody else who like me doesn't know computer science words, but gets really excited when you get a chance to say them.
Yeah.
I also have no idea if Merkle tree has anything to do with what we're talking about right now. It's one of like 4 computer science words I know.
Yeah.
anyways, so I mean, this is super cool. Like the fact that with 21 lines of code here, we have pulled in an external API, we have proxied it and added caching, which is already like, holy crap. And the fact that we can then say like specifically how long we want it to cache for. And with another couple lines of code, which I think if I just auto-complete my way, is this the invalidation key or something where I can say like what the fields are? And so I would just add like the name or something.
Yeah, there's a certain way to write this out. I don't use that often.
That I'm doing wrong.
It might be an object or just a string, but yeah,
gotcha.
That's why you can do that. And the scope, and also I just noticed there we announced this. We're announcing this tomorrow. Actually, is scopes is another property in there. So imagine. So this country's APIs return a data that is accessible to anybody, but imagine you are caching data that's specific to you. Say you log into your I don't know wherever you buy things from, and you want to view your orders, but you want to query for your own orders and cache that. Now, if you cache the query to orders, it's going to be someone else's orders probably. So with scopes, you can say scope it to an API key or a subclaim in the JWT, or a header, a random header.
That's dope. So like that's fascinating because that means that things that I've always just assumed you don't cache. You never bother caching a user specific query because the risk of accidentally showing somebody else's data is just too high. I'm like, whatever, just don't bother, right? It's fine. They can wait an extra 100 milliseconds. It's going to be okay. But what you're saying here is if I set this header to be like their specific authorization token, then for the duration of their session, if they make the same query, it'll be cached.
Yeah. So I think it's probably the claims that would use there. So with a JWT claim, we could say sub or ID or user ID or whatever you call it, and then we will decode that key and then use that.
That's so cool. That's incredibly cool. Okay, so we don't have a user to actually test this with, so we can let that sit. But that's that is a thing that I have it's the sort of problem that when I run into it, I just say, no, I'm not dealing with that. And then I just move on, right? So the fact that now there's a button you can push that makes it happen, that's pretty dang compelling.
Yeah. And that behavior, again, is default. So if you want to change any of that, then you go and configure that. But we've got defaults in place. So you don't have to think about this. It just works in a way that you probably wouldn't expect it to. So we are fundamentally really big on DX, so that's why we love this stuff, I guess. Yeah, I think what else would be cool is how we could create a GraphQL API from Stripe. Stripe have an open API spec. If you want to Google for that URL, I think it's on GitHub somewhere. We can convert that to GraphQL.
It's this one, right?
Yeah. Be a link somewhere. Just view the code, maybe. Open API folder. spec3.json. Yeah. And then if you click the raw, and then just get that URL.
Okay.
I think we can use that. I don't know if it's JSON or YML that we need, but we'll find out. So now back inside the code, we could enable namespaces for that other query just so we don't break too much.
Okay.
So you could remove the option, yeah.
And then
next it again.
Down here we're going to do
that line.
Stripe, I guess, and we'll say connector. And I saw Open API in here earlier, and we'll say Stripe schema.
Yeah.
Is like that.
Yep.
Okay.
That's all we need.
That's all we need. Okay, so then I'm going to set this up with Stripe, and we're going to go look at our API and see what happened.
So it should be in there now.
It is. It's restoring previous state. So I'm going to collapse that down. Let's get it Stripe, and holy crap, here we go.
Yeah, so this is, it's taken that specification. It doesn't look too nice right now, but I'll show you how we can fix that. So it's taking the OpenAPI spec and it's transformed all of those queries in there. But also if you click mutations, you'll also see the mutations are created as well. So creating Stripe checkout tokens or sessions is a popular thing that we do. That'll be in there somewhere.
Yeah.
So you now have an API for countries and Stripe in one API. Now imagine that countries wasn't the countries API, but it was a Shopify or something.
Right.
You can add that caching, and then you can integrate Stripe. Or maybe as you weren't using Shopify, maybe as you were building your own commerce solution. You know, the countries API that you added could be a CMS. We could have products in our CMS. And then we have Stripe as our payment and cart and whatever we want to do.
Right.
Then we build our own platform by unifying this stuff, which is cool.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So these queries don't look too nice. We've got like post and I can't remember what was on the queries, but they don't look that great. So we've got some kind of customizations that you can do as well inside of the code. So as another option, we could add transforms. And then we'll just need to, if you do schema, do an arrow function with schema being the argument.
Okay.
And then I think we could do schema dot, and it should give us some help. Query naming.
Okay.
And then in parentheses, we can provide, I think there's only one option. String option.
Okay.
Oh no, there's two. Yeah, operation ID.
All right.
So what that's doing, if we save that, it is.
Do I need to return this or anything?
Looking at the OpenAPI spec. No, that should be fine. And then now, hopefully, it's a huge API. So it looks a little bit different now. So it's using a different property.
Right.
To name the queries. So it doesn't look too gross.
Well, they're at least grouped now, which is much more useful. I guess these ones aren't, but the queries look great.
Yeah, there's ways with the mutation to do that as well. We've got, if you go back to the code, there's ways to remove stuff as well. So you can do schema dot exclude, and then you could pass in there. Let's say, for example, you wanted to exclude every query, you could do that. Or you wanted to just keep a certain subset of queries, you can do that as well.
Okay.
Which is pretty cool.
Nice.
So yeah, that's like, Stripe's a huge API, but you might only use one part of it. So, you know, what's the point of creating all those queries every single time?
Right.
So you got control.
That's super cool.
Yeah. So if you did make a query to Stripe here, it's not going to do anything.
Right.
Because I don't want to waste your time going to get a Stripe key or whatever.
Sure.
But so if anyone wanted to, they can pass headers inside of this Pathfinder, and then inside of there you can add a custom header, and then you can configure that inside of the config, so that passes along to Stripe as well. So this could be Stripe API key, and then you put in the bearer value, and then that sends it straight on over to Stripe. If you wanted to store your API keys on Grafbase, you can create a .env file locally, put that value in, and then when you deploy it, you add that key as well, and then it would act as if you made a query to Grafbase, then it would just work. It would just let you in.
Got it. So to do that, we would have to do something like are we doing it like this? Like, how do you do the replacement for it?
Yeah, I'll show you. So we'll ignore that value. Just leave that one as is for now. And I'll tell you why this X API key is actually important,
Okay.
but you can ignore it here. But in the second box, you could just add any header you wanted. Yeah, authorization, and then whatever key you wanted, ABC. And then if you turn that one on there,
Okay.
now if we go back to the configuration, we can say after transforms, and in the same kind of signature headers, we can create another function. Sorry, similar to the transforms with the.
I apologize. All right.
Sorry.
So we go with, is it headers like this?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then I think you can do headers.set. I think that's the,
Oh,
and
great. So then we could do, got it. And then we would do, like the process.m dot.
You can, but we actually made a helper for this, so it's type safe.
Oh,
so
nice.
you can do g.env, and then in parentheses, you could pass a value that lives inside of your environment variables file, and then we handle that. If we to go on to create that, that would
cool.
give you a bit more type safety there.
Got it. And so if I do this right, so this is going to fail because there's no auth header set. Does that override this or anything? Oh, inspect and fail because I don't have my thing set.
Well, yeah, so if you go to where we've got g.env.auth header, what we said there is if we have the authorization token saved in a .env file, what we actually want to do is forward your authorization header. So instead of having g.env, if you pass an object instead, and then call forward, you can then specify the name of the custom header that you called authorization as well. So the first authorization is what Stripe expects.
Got it.
You're forwarding your header. So that should work, I think.
Got it. Okay.
It'll work, but it'll tell you access denied.
That's cool. Okay. So like this is the kind of stuff that I think it's very initially confusing when you start working on these things because you've got APIs within APIs, and then it kind of turns into this sort of like nesting doll of like, okay, how do I get everything to go all the way through? And so it's nice to see that these are kind of figured out as a first class service. And it's also nice to know that if I wanted to, I can pull those tokens in and manage it here at the schema level so that nobody using the API, like if it's an internal API, they need to have an API key to call Grafbase, but they don't need to have the individual API keys for all the services that unlocks. That's a huge benefit because I don't know about y'all, but every company I've worked out with more than 15 people has this horrifying culture of like the secret DM of all the environment variables for the company in a plain text.
Everyone does it.
It's terrifying. So this is nice that you can sort of get rid of the need for some of that by managing these elsewhere.
Yeah, for sure. I think one other thing we've not got time to go into this because I want to show you something else, which is cool. But with that auth, inside of Pathfinder, you've seen that X API key, and that's exactly what you just said. If you pass the API key to Grafbase, it then gives you access to everything else. But what about if you wanted to use the authorization header to use a token from something like Clerk? You could configure with Grafbase your auth provider, and from there, I'll show you very quickly what it looks like in the code, if that's okay.
Sure.
It might help explain it. Me explain it a little bit better. But if you go to the very top and we just import auth, and then we create just below that line or wherever you like, create a new constant. Let's just call it Clerk, and then that will be auth dot. And then we've got different authorization options here. So JWT is very popular, but imagine OpenID Connect. If you call OpenID Connect, then we can give a name to this, just parameters, sorry. And then we can give a issuer URL, and any provider that supports Open API Connect will give you a URL that is for the issuer.
Right.
Then what we can do is we can inspect authorization headers that come in to the Graph-based API, and then we can get that header URL, and use an Open API Connect. We can use that issuer to get the I'm guessing the secret or the URL for the actual JWT to decode it correctly. We can decode that on the
Oh,
server and make sure you're good. And
that's
that's
super
because
cool.
you tell Clerk, hey, I'm using Graph-based. This is what they're going to sign it with, etc. And then when you make a request, we'll call Clerk, authorize it, and let you through. And then there's certain things that you can do to cache that as well. So you can say, don't go to Clerk for every request. Go there every once in a while. So yeah, that's with that auth option. You can then say, make my Stripe queries require Clerk auth, but my countries, make them public. I don't need an API key. So you've
Gotcha.
got that level of customization as well.
That's super handy. Like
So
I do love I love the sort of move toward making this stuff so configurable, because Auth is one of those things. Like Auth opens up so many fun things to build on the web, but it's such a pain. And
yeah,
like having to roll your own auth solutions and manage those tokens and make sure that people are actually allowed to do what they're supposed to do, like it just takes the fun out of building things. And so knowing that it's kind of baked into a lot of these services means that as you know, somebody who wants to experiment and play, if I can just grab Clerk and then I can say, all right, I want people to log in, and then I'm going to have a set of admins, and then like people with regular user access and then public access. I can do that through a couple fields in the Clerk UI, and then I can just grab it here and make sure that that controls access to my API. Like that's so much more pleasant than ways that I've had to roll this in the
yeah,
past.
yeah, yeah, definitely. And this kind of, we try and make everything work together. So with the Clerk token, you could specify the Clerk user ID is part of the auth scope. So then
Oh,
any queries bound to Clerk users. Um, and you could also add group-based authentication as well, authorization. So any admin can access the Stripe API, but only
is there a good,
users can access.
like, we don't have time to cover this, but is there a good place that somebody could go if they wanted to learn more about that, like a doc or a tutorial?
Yeah, for sure. Graphabase.com/guides. There's plenty in there that I've put together.
Okay.
A lot of the recent ones are around caching, because it's quite popular. One of our most popular parts of the product.
Got it. Got
But
it.
there's stuff in here. There is documentation as well, /docs. But yeah, Nextauth. People want to use log in with Nextauth and then use that token that they generate to authorize the graph-based GraphQL API.
That's
You can do
cool.
that as well. Auth0, the same. So because of all of these standards, right? Like you got the Open API, Open ID Connect specification. We conform to that and use that. Everything is able to work in a kind of in a unified way,
That's slick.
which is
Very
which is
cool.
cool.
Well,
Cool,
cool.
yeah.
So, you had said that you wanted to make sure that we got through something else. So I want to make sure I don't derail us too hard here. What was the next thing you wanted to show?
Yeah, I think so. We could go on and on and on with adding different data sources, but these you can. I think so far we've connected a GraphQL API that can be any GraphQL API, and then any Open API supported 2 or 3 specification you can convert to GraphQL. And then there is another connector called MongoDB, but we really don't have time to cover that today.
Sure.
What that allows you to do is create a connector to MongoDB and soon Neon. And then you can create models inside of this config. So you could create a user model with a name, and then we'll handle everything needed to query from that or mutate to that table in
Nice.
column. And any unique fields have unique queries. So we'll do all of that automatically. It's working with Mongo right now, but we are working on Neon, so that should be a few weeks out. But yeah, the one thing I wanted to show you just very lastly was actually let's just do the countries API because it's we don't want to get that Stripe API key.
Sure.
If we go back to Pathfinder, and if we on the on the left side, if you click the second icon down under the logo, or the third, whichever one you want to count from, and then we go to countries query, and then we'll just take one of the things here.
Let's go with
just country's country, yeah.
Yeah.
So if you want to copy the name of that,
country's country.
oops, it looks like it. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's the type. That's the type name.
Mm-hmm.
Now back inside of the config now, if we do just below wherever it can go wherever, to be honest. If you do g.extend and then inside of parentheses pass the type name, you can then extend that type. And now if we pass an argument, an object, sorry.
Object, got it.
Yeah. And then inside of here, I'm doing all of this from memory. I've done so many demos with this. I think if you just press space, we'll get a bunch of options that we can do. Maybe it's not.
Am I in the... Well, it looks like what it wants is a schema. It just gets a record, right?
Weird.
So the definition that it wants is query input. So are we adding a field here?
We're adding a field, yes. Yes, then you should be able to... There we go.
Okay, so we get a resolver.
You figured it out.
And then for this, we can probably just do something. Every country is my favorite country. Let's see, I'm missing a piece.
So, yeah,
Not
so this
assigned.
is just a file name. So if you just remove that function.
Remove the function.
Yeah, and then just call the file whatever you like, foo, JSON, whatever you like.
Oh, I got you. So we'll go with like favorite. Do I have to put an extension on it?
Yep. No.
Okay.
And then we'll complete the next thing, and I think it'll
Returns is missing. And is that I need to do like a G string?
Yeah, or a G.Boolean, whichever.
Oh yeah, we'll do a Boolean.
So these are the different kind of GraphQL scalars that these will generate.
Okay.
So now we've saved that inside of there.
Now do I need to create?
Just create a resolvers folder inside of Grafbase, and then call the file favorite.ts.
Okay.
And then we can just export a default function, and you could just do true. It doesn't really matter. But what you can do inside of those arguments is fetch data from the parent, like you can in GraphQL, or you could pass arguments, get the context from the server, the info field, like a regular GraphQL resolver.
Do you have a way to? We'll just I'm going to name this. Do you have a way to get like types out so that you would get autocomplete in this resolver?
That is coming in a few weeks' time.
Got it.
Right now, you'd have to install the GraphQL code generator to do that.
Got it. Okay.
But this will be there in a few weeks.
Nice.
What we're working on now.
But so right now, what I've just done, I've created this resolver. I've configured an extra field here. So theoretically speaking, then, when I come out here, I'm going to reload the page. I'm going to go into countries. Once it's done restoring, we've got our countries. I'm going to go into country. I'm going to get the name and whether or not it's my favorite. And what are you mad about? Oh, you need the... Wait. Oh, countries.
Yeah.
So we'll get the name, favorite, and we'll get the... we don't need any of that. We can just run this. Oh, I need to close country.
You can the query, I think. Yeah. Cool. Woohoo.
So, I mean, this is, awesome. And this is the kind of stuff that I think is so impressive about being, like, working with GraphQL is nice for these reasons. And like, People have a lot of feelings about GraphQL. I do think that due partially to projects like Gatsby, which did a lot of work to popularize GraphQL, and also use GraphQL for a lot of things that it never should have been used for. People have sort of developed some opinions about like, oh yeah, GraphQL is too much work. It's whatever. But this kind of stuff is, I think, so magical when you get to work with these APIs, because what you're basically doing here is you're saying, I know that as I'm working with my third-party APIs, the reason we're using that third-party API is because it adds some value to our business. But we're not just reselling Stripe, right? We're using Stripe to empower something else, which means I need to be able to extend and modify and use that data. And so if we're not doing it here, which would make sense as like the data layer is the source of truth for data, then we're writing middleware. And that middleware ends up being these gnarly, JavaScript functions or server-side functions or whatever it is that are calling your fetch APIs, doing data transformation, returning that. And now you don't have a single source of truth. You have the upstream raw data source of truth, and then you have the midstream like middleware source of truth. And when somebody runs into a bug, if they didn't write that code, now they've got to debug in 3 places to figure out what's wrong with their code.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I've always loved about GraphQL is this. If you can add a custom resolver, then you can modify the data in place, and it feels to the end developer who's actually consuming the API like it's all one solid thing.
Yeah. 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 I love it. I love it as well for that reason. And I think 2 things here. I think one, you can extend, like you just said, you can extend any API with your custom logic. Mm-hmm. And you've probably done this where you get your results from an API, then you do .map, then you get the fields you want, and then you return a function. Then you might have a callback that does another fetch request, and you do that in multiple places. It's silly. So here, you can do that resolver function, and this is deployed to the edge as well. So it's not making any HTTP requests to an endpoint like you would be in that old way. Mm-hmm. With this way, you get your GraphQL API deployed to the edge, and that function becomes part of the service. So if it's calling a third-party API, it will do it. And one example, if people do go to the guides, is how you can extend contentful with this. And one example that I do in the guide actually is, just search contentful or extending API, any GraphQL APIs. It's the third one. So in this example, I have a contentful model for property that has a name, image, location. Then I extend the location and I fetch from the query the latitude and longitude. And then I make a request to the weather API to get the current weather. So imagine you had a website with all these properties and you wanted to show the current weather. Well, you don't need to do that from your front end and call different APIs. You can make one request to get this data. I think it's cool because for a while, I think we went away from this and kind of create all these different endpoints to get data. But I like GraphQL because it can put everything back in one place in a single source of truth.
And again, it's like it's got to be the right tool for the job. And what you're describing here is like, if you've got a website and that website is displaying data, so what you've mentioned here, you've got properties and you want to show what the current weather is at the property, or if you've got restaurants and you want to show what the current wait time is, or whatever it is, like how long it would take you from your current location. Those are the sorts of things that lots and lots of people are going to load. And they, if your website is doing well, which we hope it is, then your big issue is going to be, how do you make this stuff fast? Because these are complex queries. If you've got to send, because what we end up with is not just that we have to call multiple APIs, but we end up with a waterfall of data queries where you have to request the property information, then you have to parse it, then you have to request weather information, then you have to parse it, and then you have to return that to the front end. So you've got four legs of this trip to get data from the user's browser up to all these different points and then back down with the data they need. And if you don't have a way to efficiently combine and cache that, especially when it doesn't change, like if people are looking at Spain and they want to see the properties in Spain, the list doesn't change minute to minute. It probably doesn't change day to day. So you can get pretty aggressive about caching that. And maybe you want the weather to update hourly so that because it looks like you're showing the current temperature, right? So every hour there's one slow query and every other query is lightning fast. And I think that to me is like, this is when you really start looking at the right tool for the job. And there are a lot of ways that you can solve this problem. You know, you can do it however you want, but this is a really nice way to solve this problem.
Yeah, 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 definitely. I enjoy using it to bring in other data sources and then extend it without having to build my own server. It's just a function. You created a TypeScript file there that can do custom logic. You can fetch data from the root. You can access environment variables. You can do whatever you need to do inside of there. So yeah, I like it.
Yeah, I think this is it's just a really nice it's a nice workflow, especially when you're in a team where different people control different parts of the stack. And if you've got like different owners for different APIs, and then you've got somebody who's like the back of the front end owner, which is sort of what I ended up being at IBM. And then you've got front end devs who don't really want to think about data. They just need it to build the UIs they're on task to build. Then GraphQL is such a good solution for that because it allows the back of the front end person to create a unified way of dealing with this instead of having to help each team maintain their own custom set of middleware. So I think, and the other thing that we didn't talk about is like GraphQL, because you only request per field, like, can I see things like usage per field as opposed to per query and stuff like that to show, hey, we've got this really expensive custom field and no one ever uses it. Can we kill that?
Yeah. So that is, we just released our first version of the observation API or the analytics, sorry. And the next thing of that is to be able to look at the field, like the tracing. I think, some people might be familiar with tracing.
Yeah.
Tracing that down to the field level. That it might be that no one implementing the APIs that we build is fetching the weather field, so we can just get rid of that. But I think with caching, the concept of stale while revalidate we support. So before, when you mentioned there could be one slow query every hour, well, actually there wouldn't be, because it would be fast. It would just be updated in the background, and then it would replace the cache value. So it's pretty cool that as on the web we've moved that along in things like us, and GraphQL is able to kind of bake that in, and it's not GraphQL versus something else anymore. You can use whatever you want, whatever solutions you want.
Well, and you can even do something like, if I know that a lot of people have feelings about GraphQL mutations, and sometimes I share those feelings. So why not use GraphQL as your query layer so that you get these nicely cached and queried everything? Now, granted, you do trade off if you're not using mutations. You're not going to get that instant cache invalidation of having the mutations hooked to your queries. But if that doesn't matter to you, then you can get this really nice query layer with good caching basically for free by stitching in your REST APIs, and then still do your posts and your puts and your deletes with a REST API if you want. So you can kind of build, and you can build the right solution for your team based on everybody's skill level, who has to work with it, what their preferences are, what your existing tool set is. I like the way that the space has matured to, instead of saying like the only way to get benefits out of GraphQL is going 100% GraphQL, which I think was the Gatsby approach, now it's just like any other tool on the web. You use it where it makes sense. You don't use it where it doesn't make sense. And it should be making your experience of building the application you maintain better.
Yeah, 100% agree. And as much as I create content around GraphQL and work at a GraphQL company and have done for many years, I agree GraphQL is not the best solution for some things. But what I think it really shines at is this ability to unify all of these different sources. And when you put it in the context of caching or transforming, like the Stripe example, what a pain to have to convert or create a GraphQL API on top of Stripe. Because of things like specifications, like the GraphQL spec, you can take that and convert it to REST if you wanted to. So if someone didn't want to interface with it. So we try to kind of not ignore, but we don't talk about GraphQL so much, because it's just an implementation detail. It's an API at the end of the day, at the edge.
Got it.
And yeah, so I try not to get too hung up on, like, I don't try to get too hung up on GraphQL as much these days, because it's just a fetch request at the end of the day.
Yes, exactly. Well, cool. So I think we probably don't have time to do any additional code. So let's do this. Why don't, for anybody who wants to go deeper here, what should next steps be for somebody who wants to explore? We've linked to the guides. I'm going to drop another link to your social media here. Where else should somebody go?
Yeah, so there is obviously graph-base.com. The docs are on there as well. And that will teach you everything you need to know to get going with Grafbase. And then there is, I have my own weekly videos. That is at graphql.wtf. And I show you things with GraphQL and teach you things there as well. So if anyone is new to GraphQL, there's stuff on there as well.
Awesome. All right. Well, let's do this then. Let's give one more shout out to our captioner. Vanessa's been here with us all day. Thank you so much, Vanessa. That's made possible through the support of our sponsors, Netlify and Vetsu Code, kicking in to make this show more accessible to more people. And while you're checking out things on the site, make sure you go and look at the schedule. It's a little sparse right now because I've been lazy about my admin work, but never fear, there's lots and lots coming up. You can get on the newsletter. You can subscribe on YouTube. You can go wherever you want to go that you like to be on the internet. I'm probably there. Jamie, thank you so much for spending some time with us today. This was an absolute blast. Do you have any parting words for folks before we call this one done?
Thank you very much. And yeah, I think if anyone can tll me how to get a Twitch username, get logged into my Twitch account again, please let me know because I'm locked out.
Oh, no. All right, y'all. We are going to call this one done. We're going to go find somebody to raid. Thank you all so much for hanging out with us, and we will catch you next time.